Tobacco usage has been on the decline worldwide for the past few decades. According to the WHO, in 2000, 33% of adults globally smoked tobacco. By 2020, this had declined to just 22%. This is a good thing. Cigarettes are the only legal product that, when used as intended, kills approximately half of its consumers. Given that global cigarette demand is falling, you might expect that tobacco companies are declining as well. But if you believe this, you would be wrong. Philip Morris International, the parent company of Marlboro, is one of the biggest tobacco companies in the world. The company has been doing extremely well in recent years. In fact, their share price has almost doubled in the past year alone. Their market capitalization has surpassed $250 billion. So how is this possible? As cigarettes have declined, they've been partially replaced by new forms of nicotine consumption. Most notably, nicotine pouches including Zyn have seen a massive increase in popularity over the past few years. Back in 2022, Philip Morris paid $16 billion to acquire the Swedish Match Company, the maker of Zyn nicotine pouches. As an aside, the Swedish Match Company was founded in the early 1900s by a man named Ivar Kruger. Kruger was an extremely interesting individual. If you want to learn about his story, we made a video about him last year, which you can find a link to in the description below. Zyn has been a resounding commercial success. In the first quarter of 2025, Philip Morris sold 202 million cans of Zyn in the US alone, an increase of 53% versus the year ago period. In this video, we'll look at the history of Zyn and how it became so popular. Smoking in America peaked in the 1960s, when approximately 50% of adult men and 35% of adult women smoked tobacco regularly. The biggest beneficiary of this was Philip Morris, a tobacco giant which owned many cigarette brands, including Marlboro and Virginia Slims. They owed their success in a large part due to their highly successful marketing campaigns. Marlboro was marketed towards men, with the commercials featuring the iconic Marlboro Man, a manly and independent cowboy. Virginia Slims were marketed towards women. They were portrayed as a feminist product and a symbol of female empowerment. Philip Morris had achieved the holy grail of marketing, an addicted consumer base with strong brand loyalty. Throughout the later half of the 20th century, Philip Morris was able to achieve obscene levels of profit. As early as the 1960s, the US Surgeon General started to warn that nicotine is addictive and smoking carries serious health risks. Throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, this view became a broad consensus throughout the medical community. Government agencies and nonprofits started to run anti-smoking PR campaigns to convince Americans to quit the habit. These campaigns were highly successful. At the peak in the 1960s, approximately 40% of US adults smoked cigarettes. By the 1990s, this had declined to approximately 25%. But Big Tobacco's problems were just getting started. In the 1990s, a series of congressional investigations found that tobacco companies knew full well that their products were addictive and deadly. For decades, they actively deceived the public about this. This culminated in 1998 with the so-called Master Settlement Agreement, or MSA. American tobacco companies were forced to pay an eye-popping $200 billion of damages over the course of 25 years. This money was paid to state governments to compensate them for Medicaid costs they had incurred treating patients with smoking-related diseases. Tobacco companies were also banned from almost all forms of advertising. The MSA marked the end of the Marlboro Man, at least in the US. Even after agreeing to pay $200 billion, Big Tobacco was not completely out of the woods. Government investigations continued, and there was an ever-present threat of class action lawsuits. If the families of lung cancer victims could sue the tobacco companies, the potential legal liability doesn't even bear thinking about. In the 2000s, the future for Big Tobacco in the US looked very grim indeed, but Philip Morris had long since expanded all over the world. In Europe, South America, and Southeast Asia, attitudes towards smoking were, and still are, very different. For various cultural and political reasons, many countries have declined to crack down on Big Tobacco in the same way that the US did. While the domestic market was under threat, Philip Morris's international operations were booming. In 2008, Philip Morris thought of a pretty ingenious solution. They would split the company into two. A few years prior, Philip Morris had changed his corporate name to Altria. This was part of a diversification strategy which largely failed and we won't discuss in this video. Altria would continue to sell cigarettes within the United States. They would create a new corporate entity called Philip Morris International, or PMI. This contained all the company's international operations. So if you buy a pack of Marlboros in the US, you're buying it from Altria. If you buy a pack of Marlboros in Indonesia, for example, you're buying it from PMI. The same brand is actually being sold by two different companies. The two new entities signed legal agreements whereby Altria is not allowed to sell cigarettes outside the US and vice versa. Existing Philip Morris shareholders received shares in both of the new entities. So what's the purpose of doing this? Imagine a worst-case scenario where new lawsuits and regulatory actions in the US create liabilities so large as to bankrupt Altria. In this case, your Altria shares become worthless, but you still own your PMI shares, which are very valuable in their own right. The international business is insulated from the domestic business, and thus can't be dragged down on the same sinking ship. PMI sells cigarettes in Europe, the Middle East, South America, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. In most of these countries, cigarette consumption is on the decline, but the rate of decline is very slow. In 2019, they sold 707 billion cigarettes globally. There are 20 cigarettes in each pack, so that's about 35 billion packs. Assuming people smoke 1 pack per day, this represents approximately 95 million smokers. By 2024, cigarette sales volume had fallen 13% to 617 billion. In addition to selling regular cigarettes, they also have something called IQOS. The IQOS is an electronic device that heats up a stick of tobacco without burning it. This is possibly not as bad for you as a traditional cigarette, although this is debatable. Many smokers have switched to the IQOS, hoping that it is safer. IQOS sales have surged to 140 billion units in 2024. If we add together traditional cigarettes and IQOS sticks, the total volume in 2019 was 766 billion. In 2024, it was 757 billion. That's a decline of 1% over the course of 5 years. While the rate of decline is very slow, the core business is indeed declining. No company wants to preside over declining business. Philip Morris International was determined to find new ways to grow. So in 2022, they paid $16 billion to acquire the Swedish match company. This is a company that makes Zyn. Before Zyn, the Swedish match company made something called snus. Snus consists of processed tobacco leaves placed in a porous pouch. The pouch is placed under your lips, allowing the nicotine to be slowly absorbed through your gums. Snus has been popular in Sweden for hundreds of years. Snus has helped Sweden to have one of the lowest smoking rates in Europe. Approximately 12% of Swedish adults use either traditional or artificial snus. Only 6% smoke cigarettes. For comparison, approximately 28% of adults in Europe as a whole smoke cigarettes, although this varies greatly by country. In the mid-2010s, the Swedish match company decided to modernize its product offering. They developed an artificial nicotine pouch that does not contain tobacco leaves. This is potentially safer than traditional snus, as tobacco leaves contain certain chemicals that can be bad for your gums. Nicotine is chemically extracted from the tobacco plants and combined with plant-based fillers. So while they do not contain actual tobacco leaves, the nicotine is still derived from tobacco. One advantage of artificial nicotine pouches is that you can add artificial flavors, which many people prefer over the taste of tobacco. The Swedish match company started selling their artificial nicotine pouches under the Zyn brand name in both Sweden and the United States in 2016. Obviously, the US market is far larger than the Swedish market, so that's where the main focus is. As a proof of concept, they set up a few temporary pop-up stores in the US to sell Zyn. Encouraged by the initial success, they started signing deals with regional and then national gas station and convenience store chains. By 2020, Zyn had become ubiquitous in America, being sold at 100,000 retail locations nationwide. Pretty much anywhere that sells cigarettes also sells Zyn. Throughout the early 2020s, Zyn's popularity skyrocketed. In the first quarter of 2025, they sold 202 million cans of Zyn in the US, an increase of 53% versus the year-ago period. To meet surging demand, they opened a factory in Kentucky to manufacture Zyn. They are currently working on a second factory in Colorado, which is expected to come online in 2026. Remember that when Philip Morris International was spun off from Altria, they signed a non-compete agreement whereby they are not allowed to sell cigarettes in the US. This non-compete only applies to traditional cigarettes. Zyn is not subject to the non-compete. So why has Zyn become so popular in America? Let's start off by looking at the demographics of Zyn users. According to a recent survey published by the National Library of Medicine, 62% of American Zyn users are above the age of 21, 26% are between the ages of 18 and 21, and 12% are below the age of 18. You have to be 21 to purchase Zyn legally, but it's pretty easy for people to get around this by getting an older friend to buy it for them. 73% of Zyn users also smoke cigarettes. This indicates that Zyn is mostly used as a smoking cessation product. There are other alternatives to smoking, most notably vaping. Vaping has a couple of disadvantages. It is very visible and therefore carries with it a certain social stigma. You cannot vape in indoor public places, so you have to go outside to vape. Zyn is discreet and can be used anywhere. If you have a Zyn pouch in your mouth, your friends and family will be none the wiser. The second reason for Zyn's popularity is its low cost. The average cost of a can of Zyn in the US is approximately $5. The average price of a pack of cigarettes in the US is $10. This is not because Zyn is cheaper to produce than cigarettes. The production cost is about the same. The price discrepancy can be explained almost entirely by taxes. The federal government charges a 1% excise tax per pack of cigarettes. Every single state also charges its own cigarette tax. The tax rates vary widely. The lowest tax state is Missouri, which charges 17 cents per pack. The highest tax state is New York, which charges $5.35. The average state excise tax is approximately $2, so that's $3 of total taxes. Currently, there is no federal excise tax on Zyn. Most states do not charge taxes on Zyn either, although this may soon change. There are two reasons why states charge cigarette taxes. Firstly, it discourages people from smoking. Secondly, it's a very good way to raise revenue. If you're addicted to smoking, your willingness to pay is very high. Thus, states can charge very high cigarette taxes without causing demand destruction. On the other hand, imagine hypothetically if you tried to charge very high taxes on airline flights. Nobody is addicted to flying, and most people can do without it. The high taxes will result in a decrease in airline ticket sales, so you will collect far less tax revenue than you intended. Nicotine is highly addictive, whether you get it from cigarettes or Zyn. People who used to smoke cigarettes switch to Zyn to save money. This results in decreased tax revenue for the state. As the popularity of Zyn increases, states may decide to start charging taxes on it as well. In fact, this is already starting to happen. Recently, California imposed a 56% tax on Zyn. Colorado and Connecticut charge 50%. Minnesota charges a 95% tax. I expect more states to follow suit over the coming years. As the price differential decreases, some Zyn users may go back to traditional cigarettes. PMI's acquisition of the Swedish match company is not the first time a traditional tobacco company has tried to enter a new market. In 2018, Altria paid $13 billion for a 35% stake in the vape company Juul, valuing the company at almost $40 billion. This turned out to be one of the most disastrous investments in corporate history. Throughout the early to mid-2010s, Juul rose to popularity due to its sleek-looking design and aggressive marketing campaigns, which often featured young adult models. They also offered flavors such as mango, cucumber, and fruit, which became extremely popular. At the peak, Juul achieved 70% market share for vapes in the US. As it turned out, a very high percentage of Juul's customers were kids. By 2018, 21% of high school students and 5% of middle school students in America were vaping. The majority of this vaping was done with Juuls. Juul became the target of increasing scrutiny related to their advertising practices, which many analysts believe were intended to target children. Shortly after Altria made its investment in Juul, Congress opened up investigations into the company. This was the beginning of the end. In 2019, under intense public and regulatory pressure, Juul stopped selling all of its fruity flavors, which were disproportionately popular with teenagers. In 2022, the FDA banned Juul from selling any vapes at all. This decision was eventually reversed, but the damage was already done. Juul still exists today, but is a mere shadow of its former self. In 2023, Altria forfeited its 35% stake in Juul in exchange for some patents related to heated tobacco products. These patents were worth very little. Altria's $13 billion investment ended in a near total loss. While Altria's Juul investment was a complete disaster, PMI's acquisition of the Swedish match company is viewed as a great success. So why did Zyn succeed where Juul failed? Juul's main problem was its aggressive advertising campaigns. While very successful in the short term, they sowed the seeds of the company's eventual demise. Juul's founders were tech bros who were completely unprepared to deal with the complex PR and regulatory environment they would eventually face. On the other hand, Zyn was created by experienced tobacco executives who would not make the same mistakes. Zyn rose to popularity despite doing almost zero paid advertising. They instead focused on distribution. Make Zyn available at as many convenience stores as possible. Eventually, consumers will notice it. So-called Zynfluencers post videos on TikTok showing themselves using Zyn. These Zynfluencers are not paid and have no affiliation with the Swedish match company or PMI whatsoever. They are doing it on their own accord. This is beneficial for two reasons. First of all, it's free advertising, but more importantly, it shields PMI from regulatory scrutiny. Maybe minors will see Zyn-related videos on TikTok and start using Zyn as a result. PMI can honestly incredibly say, this isn't our fault. We have no control over what people do on social media, so we shouldn't be held responsible. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Zyn? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.